Hello, my name is Narina, and for years my family treated me like I was invisible. At dinner, they told me, "We don't want another mouth to feed," and handed me a janitor job in my own company. Can you imagine smiling through that? I did, but that smile hid everything I was planning. The very next day, one email changed everything, and suddenly, the person who humiliated me was suspended. Investigations began. And I realized the game had only just begun. How far would I go to reclaim what was rightfully mine? I drove up the winding driveway under amber streetlights, Boulder's crisp autumn air brushing against my cheeks. It had been weeks, too many, for me to face the Carver family dinner invitation. Yet here I was, keys in hand, heart heavy, still hoping for warmth. The oak front door creaked familiar, the foyer's scent of polished wood and lavender candles unchanged. I stepped into the dining room, where a long table stood waiting, its surface gleaming with fine china and linens, but the atmosphere already felt brittle. My parents, Silas and Vera Carver, sat at the head of the table. My sister, Isolde, was placed at my mother's right. The centerpiece, a bouquet of orange chrysanthemums, offered cheap comfort. I smiled as I slid into my chair, one I remembered picking out years ago when I helped build this house, helped build this company. But tonight, the seat felt awkward, smaller. We shared bread. Vera poured wine I don't drink anymore. I said nothing of my week, my home repairs in my small apartment downtown, my board meetings, the bug in the app I still maintain. I had been ghosted by calls and messages, but I showed because I believed family shows up even when they're tired. After a moment of quiet, Vera cleared her throat. "We've talked," she said, voice soft but with edges. "We think it's time you helped out in a different way." The candle flickered between us. My heart twisted. Helped out? In what way? My father's gaze held mine. "We found a janitor opening for you. At Carver Care." The words hovered, heavy. At my own company, not COO, not partner, janitor. My throat tightened. Rage and disbelief tangled inside. I forced a nod. I only exhaled once. Silence stretched long enough for Isolde to cut a piece of roast, its juices pooling. My mother's lips pressed together. Their speech carried a kindness dressed in condescension. They meant it as kindness, a charitable offer, but I understood. Demotion with a friendly face. No salary, no acknowledgement of the years I logged, of documents I drafted from scratch, of code I pushed live. It was favor-wrapping shame. Vera spoke again. "We thought you'd accept. Less stress, less responsibility." They seemed to believe that cleaning floors and washing dishes in your own building was restful. I stared at the ID badge in my mother's hand, plastic card with letters stamped, "Janitor." No title above my name, no co-founder or COO, just unpaid steward of spaces once designed by me. My fingers curled under the table, knuckles tight. I did not speak. I did not protest. I did not cry. I giggled inside. Because I had learned long ago that screaming makes others uncomfortable, and then they pretend they didn't hear. They treated demotion as generosity, as though giving someone a mop was mercy. After dinner, I rose from the table, carrying the badge and a tray of dishes. I washed their wine glasses, rinsed the cutlery, scrubbed away remnants of roast. The suds, the rinse again, each motion steady. I pressed my palm against the sink's cool steel, letting regret and anger sink through skin. I remembered signing the founding charter in a cramped basement office. I remembered nights staying awake debugging, drafting contracts, negotiating with banks. I remembered blueprints I sketched on graph paper, the early investors I convinced. My hands made every stroke of those documents. My hands built those servers. And here I was, holding a badge that called me unpaid. My internal voice whispered, "You don't scream when you're drowning. You just sink slower." A cold joke, but accurate. When dinner ended, I didn't linger. The leaves outside were whispering in the wind. I thanked them, said goodnight, and walked away to my car. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt like tiny fractures in what had once been solid. Back in my apartment, I dropped keys on the counter. Lamplight was dim, shadows long across my desk. I opened my laptop. The dashboard I once accessed nightly, user stats, bug reports, growth metrics, blinked back at me. Access denied. My co-founder login no longer accepted. My email routes locked. My nameplate title removed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A storm brewed behind closed doors, a plan forming in silence. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because they didn't know. They never did. The blue glow from my laptop screen spilled over the kitchen counter as I leaned in closer, watching code ripple across the display like an old friend whispering secrets. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt present, because deep beneath all the public-facing dashboards and the flashy front-end features, there was a hidden backbone I had designed myself. A silent digital trail meant only for me. And now, I was going to follow it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, a habit I hadn't shaken since the company's scrappier days. I pulled on a pair of plain black pants, a gray hoodie, and sneakers, the unofficial uniform of someone meant to be invisible. No makeup, hair in a low bun. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "Today, you're no one." That was the point. The drive to Carver Care headquarters was short but tense. I hadn't been there since the dinner. As I pulled into the staff lot, the one without reserved parking, I caught a glimpse of the executive entrance. Someone else's car now sat in the spot with my old nameplate. My fingers gripped the steering wheel. I exhaled, grabbed my badge, and stepped out. Inside, the front lobby buzzed with its usual curated hospitality, dim lights, soft jazz, the sterile scent of money. I walked toward the elevator, but my badge failed to scan. A red light blinked with a tiny beep that somehow sounded smug. A security guard I'd hired 2 years ago came over. His name was Kyle. He didn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Miss Carver. You're listed as auxiliary staff now. Maintenance enters through the east side." "Of course," I said. My voice didn't crack. I nodded like it made sense, like I hadn't signed the architectural blueprints myself. I walked around the building's side entrance, past the dumpsters. When I finally got in, everything felt surreal. The office had changed. A new wall partition stood where my glass office once opened to the floor. The plaque that once bore my name? Gone. In its place. Wellness Lounge, sponsored by Isolde Carver. My old desk, chair, and even the little succulent I kept by the window disappeared. All of it sterilized, rewritten, like I had never been there at all. I found a janitor's closet near the back. Inside was a set of cleaning supplies, rubber gloves, and a rolling cart. And sitting quietly on the bottom shelf, a walkie-talkie. My first job? Clean and restock Floor 2 break room. The task had been assigned via the Janitor app, a mobile interface I had personally programmed 3 years ago when we were understaffed, and I thought it'd be innovative to help our cleaning team. I built it with logging, timestamps, and internal messaging. That's what made what happened next so sharp. I pulled out my phone, loaded the back-end dashboard from my hidden dev account, one I had buried deep within the code, inaccessible without a nested key. Within seconds, I watched the employee logs pour in. And there it was. My admin credentials had been revoked not just once, but scrubbed completely, like I had never existed in the system. Later that afternoon, I tried logging into our Slack workspace. Invalid credentials. I opened my work email. Account deactivated. It didn't just lock me out, it sent me a bounce back. The email address you're trying to reach no longer exists. I stared at the message, heart pounding. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Kylie, my old assistant. We hadn't spoken in over a month. Her text was short. "Did you quit? They told us you ghosted." I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumbs hovered. Then I typed, "Did they say when I ghosted? Like 3 weeks ago? We had a meeting and Isolde said she hadn't heard from you in a while, so they just moved on. Honestly, they made it sound like you burned out or something." I didn't reply. I sat there with the walkie-talkie still humming beside me, listening to a janitor 2 floors up call in for extra paper towels. So that's the story. That I burned out. That I walked away. That I abandoned something I gave my 20s to build. I didn't rage. I didn't throw the phone. I went home. That night, after a microwave dinner and a long shower, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a glass of water. No music. No TV. Just the sound of betrayal echoing through the gaps of what used to be my family. I turned on my laptop again and dove deep into the internal log system, the one I built before we ever hired a cybersecurity firm. Most people didn't even know it existed. It tracked every login, every deleted account, every internal change. It was there that I found it. An email sent from Isolda's account to HR. Subject line, access rights, Narina Carver. Body, please ensure Narina is removed from all shared drives, admin systems, and communications. She is to retain janitorial-level access only until further notice. This should not be discussed openly until implementation is complete. Dated 2 weeks before the dinner. My breath caught. The message wasn't just cold, it was calculated, premeditated. They didn't wait for me to slip. They planned my disappearance like a corporate initiative. I sat back in my chair, blinking slowly. They didn't push me out in the heat of anger, I whispered aloud. They filed it under strategy. I was a checkbox. I saved the email, encrypted it to a private cloud folder titled Proof of Erasure. Then I created a new hidden log file, a private vault, accessible only through a mirrored dev shell I wrote for emergencies. I labeled it simply, /n rebuild. In the folder, I dropped a single note. They buried me before I was dead. Let's see what grows from underneath. I didn't shed a tear. I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to document. Because what they didn't know was that I never left. I just moved to the basement of the code, and I was watching. The group text came in that night. Be grateful we even gave you anything. I stared at the glow of my phone in the dark apartment. The faces of my parents and Isolda zoomed in my mind, smirking behind polite words. Sleep eluded me. I kept turning over their voices in my head, turning over the badge, the locks, the plaque. I rubbed my forehead until my temples throbbed. Morning light crept in through slatted blinds, soft and breaking. I peeled out of bed, wary of shadows, coffee brewed. I stood at my kitchen window, watching joggers pass, mailboxes glinting in the sun. Everyone else experienced a normal Tuesday. I had a different calendar, one counting betrayals. By 9:30 a.m., I was parked in the visitor lot at Carver Care. I wore a plain blouse, no jewelry, hair pulled back. I still owned the car with my name on the title, but it felt more like a rental. I stepped through the door, letting the receptionist glance at me impassively. I had a key, but co-developer had been scrubbed. Now I was just auxiliary staff in system logs, but I had something more, evidence. I slipped into a quiet corner office that had once been mine. The glass walls, etched with Narina Carver, co-founder, were now blank. The engraving was removed. Who walked by and noted me? No one. I sat in the chair anyway, sluggish vinyl, cold armrests, and waited for what I was always expecting. Not long after, a Zoom meeting notification popped up on my phone. Celine had forwarded it. It was the board meeting. Everyone was there except me. My reflection appeared in the black screen, so faint I almost thought it was smoke. On the conference video, I saw Callum tug at his tie, smoothing his shirt, the kind of posture people adopt when under pressure but pretending they aren't. Callum spoke first. Narina has a flair for design, sure, always has, but operations, that's what makes or breaks a company. He leaned forward. She's not built for that daily grind. Isolda nodded across from him, dark brows drawn. The CFO chuckled. She's more of a visionary than a pit boss, if you know what I mean. My hands shook. Betrayal cut sharper than I thought. It wasn't just what they were saying. It was how they believed I wouldn't hear. They believed I had walked out. That evening, in my small apartment, I dug through boxes, legal papers, files, contracts, all versions of the founding documents, the charter, the shareholder agreement, profit-sharing schedules. In my hand, shaking like a leaf, was a digital printout of the latest shareholder report published on the website. There, I saw it. Proxy signature. C. Whitaker. In places that my signature was supposed to be. The graph showing ownership stakes was shifted. My equity diluted. My name was present, but only as a placeholder. I kept going. I found an amendment dated after the dinner, signed by Isolde and Callum. One of the signatures looked suspicious. My signature, scanned and copied. I held the paper to the light, my name in perfect script, but this wasn't the original. I didn't jump up and storm into their offices. I didn't shout, because I knew that would be expected. Instead, I photographed every document. I printed copy after copy. I placed them in a manila envelope stamped, "Not yet." The label was quiet defiance. That night, the hallway in my parents' house caught my eye. A family portrait hanging outside their bedroom door. I remembered being the center, then off to a corner. In the current photo, I wasn't there at all. The frame was whole, flawless, but the image had been edited. I wasn't in the picture. I took a breath. The air felt thin in my chest. If I wasn't in the frame, maybe I never existed to them. I closed the door to my childhood bedroom quietly, sliding down the wall, my back resting against polished wood. The room smelled like old paper and dust and memories. Outside, the porch light flickered, and I saw early fall leaves rattling. I squeezed my eyes shut, imagining the voice of my mother telling people, "She's not involved anymore." Imagining Isolde saying she stepped aside. Imagining a future where my absence became the default. Deep inside, I knew this wasn't final. This wasn't giving up. I gathered the printed documents, zipped them in the envelope, then locked it in my safe. I didn't feel whole, but I felt anchored. Every betrayal left its mark. But this one taught me a truth. They could erase names and titles, but not history. They could reframe stories, but they couldn't rewrite what I built. I stood in my apartment, windows closed, breathing in the quiet. The documents lay behind me. I opened the manila envelope and closed it again. I whispered to no one. Theirs is the frame, mine is the foundation. I stood in my kitchen late, lights dim, kettle off. My phone buzzed again, another group text from Isolde, Vera, and Silas. "Be grateful we even gave you anything." I pressed the screen until the letters blurred. Then, I closed the app and let the silence stretch. I had expected this. I even rehearsed what I might say, but expectation doesn't soften the blow. Morning came slow. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, not to wake up, but to steel myself. I reheated last night's coffee, heat wrapping around my fingers. The mug still carried the imprint of the joint logo I designed years ago. I studied the symbol, then set the mug down. Symbols matter. It's what they alter when they want you unseen. I drove to Carver Care by back roads, avoiding the reserved parking, pulling into the service entrance instead. Cardinal rule, never offer more than they demand. I wore a plain sweater, jeans, no signs of the executive I once was. Every step felt measured. Inside, I began with the message. I watched Vera's reaction bubble under Isolde's text. Dad didn't respond. Silence between them makes more noise than arguments. I inhaled. I told myself I wasn't naive. I wasn't crazy. Intent matters. My shift started with stockroom restocking. Carts, mops, cleaning supplies. I understood routing, supply logistics, how behind the scenes the janitorial crew plugs into the whole facility. I passed by the hallway terminal. Old badge swipes I designed lit up, but mine now only accessed floor lights and waste systems, limited. I felt bifurcated. Half architect, half nobody. At mid-morning, the moment came. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, thin, unassuming, with my name engraved in small script. I slipped it into the terminal beside the elevator bank. Public hallway. My hands pulse as I connected and typed. I logged into the dev backend with credentials nobody expected me to have. Years ago, I built a fallback account, an emergency shell, invisible by default. I still had permissions. I created a folder named Reclaim. Inside, I tagged timestamps of admin access, flagged usage anomalies linked to Isolde and Callum. I marked deleted accounts. I archived every deleted document. I uploaded logs. Cleaning supplies tucked under my arm, I wiped smudges from the glass surfaces as though wiping away lies. The cart rattled behind me. I paused, heard footsteps. Celine. She was rounding the corner, clipboard tucked under her arm. Her eyes widened when she saw the flash drive. She stammered, then whispered, "You still remember your codename login?" I nodded. No voice. She swallowed hard. "They thought they erased you." I continued pushing the cart, steering it past open doors, past windows where people glanced. I was a ghost in daylight. Invisible isn't nothing. Lunch came around. I sat in the break room eating tuna salad and a slice of apple. The TV played a news segment about family businesses failing when internal conflict isn't handled. It made me wince. The anchor used words like betrayal, legacy, trust. I looked at the badge clipped to my pocket. Janitor. The disconnect weighed heavy. In the afternoon, I paused at the CEO's door. Old wood polish still rich in scent, engraved nameplate removed, leaving 2 small holes. I leaned in, listening. Voices, Isolde's laughter, Callum's bravado, claims of change for the good, improving transparency. They never mention me. They rewrite history without me present. The sun dipped, shadows stretched across marble floors. My arms were tired from pushing that cart, my spirit unshaken. I tucked the flash drive deeper into my bag. Celine found me at the exit, hands shaking. She handed me an envelope, plain, unmarked. Her eyes held apology and fear. "You should have this," she said. She didn't explain everything. She glanced behind as though someone might have heard. I nodded. "Thank you." My voice soft, controlled. Driving home under twilight, the sky washed in lavender and gold, I turned past familiar landmarks, the old hardware store, the corner bakery where I used to meet investors, now shuttered. The empty spaces mirrored how I felt, spaces in my life, in my work, in family, where things should have been alive but were hollowed out. Inside my apartment, I locked the door, leaned against it. I opened the plain envelope. Papers inside, server logs, dev permissions record, lines of code with my name as author. Dated, old, untouched, since they tried to renounce the record. Proof, quiet rebellion in tangible form. I spread them across the table. Neat stacks, annotated margins, discrepancies circled. I felt strong. Not because I had raised my voice, because I held the facts. I held evidence. I thought of Isolde, smiling at boardrooms, shaking hands, of Vera, nodding at the gala, raising glasses, of Dad, silent, all of them believing they had changed nothing, all of them believing the narrative was theirs to tell. They handed me a mop, but I came back with metadata. Celine handed me something in a plain envelope, her hand shaking slightly. I stared at the crease, the faint weight of paper folded inside. My heart thumped, not from dread, but because I felt, for the first time in a long time, that someone saw me still. I tucked the envelope beneath my coat, slipped out of Carver Care's service entrance, and walked home through golden afternoon light, the streets quiet, leaves rustling under my boots. Somewhere in the shift between daylight and dusk, I promised myself, today I build my truth. Later that evening, I pulled the envelope onto my desk, lamp casting a soft halo around it. I peeled open the flap, and inside found a document. Thin, fragile, yellowed at the edges. The founding agreement, signed by 3 names, Isolde Carver, Callum Vance, and me, Narina Carver. It placed me as primary stakeholder. My breath caught. Years of feeling sidelined, minimized, erased, all of it bristled to life. Because this version existed. It mattered. Celine's voice came softly behind me. She sat in the chair I once used, before promotions and plaques and presentations stole it away. "I never filed the amended version. I couldn't do it," she said. She clasped her hands, her eyes aligned with mine, not full of pity, but regret. She had watched the wrong document circulate. She had said nothing. And in that silence, I understood loyalty is sometimes hidden in avoiding wrong turns, even if avoiding meant betrayal. I asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her gaze dropped. Because you were always busy fighting 100 fires, I kept it safe, thinking you'd need it later. Later. Hopes delayed until they hurt. Her words broke something in me. Not anger exactly, but that low hum of resolve. Celine had given me a tool. Not to overturn everything today, but to begin. That night, I didn't sleep well. Between a lukewarm dinner and the hum of the heater, I sat at my laptop and loaded up that old agreement. I connected to the back-end system via a legacy protocol, one of those fallback features I built when we were smaller, when redundancy mattered. Because to survive, you prepare for betrayal. I granted myself privileges again, read-only access to audit logs, to file versions, to old archives. I triggered a dormant audit function that would flag discrepancies in file ownership without identifying who set it off. Ghost audit. At midnight, the system-generated flag lit up in the admin dashboard. Among the logs, one unusual entry, a memo from HR referencing access levels to shared drives. Another, a copy of the shareholder report presented publicly, but behind the scenes, the ownership pie chart had shifted, my name reduced. Someone, not me, signed off on it. Callum's name, Isolde's, maybe both. Somewhere in that moment, I realized what truth felt like. Not loud, not triumphant yet, but unbreakable. It was breathing under the rubble. Morning came. I went through my routine, simple breakfast, checking email, stepping into my car. I drove to the building as if nothing had changed, but inside, everything was different. I parked in the same spot I always avoided, walked through the side entrance. The badge clipped to my belt, Janitor. My former title was gone, but my mind was lit. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need attention. I found the hallway terminal, that blank screen, and tapped in. There it was, the alert on the monitoring system. The CTO had forwarded a message to Isolde. "Where the hell is this coming from?" The tone was sharp, defensive. The question floated in air. I stood back, arms folded. They didn't know yet it was me behind the ghost audit. Later, in the break room, I ate canned soup out of a ceramic bowl, sitting at a table where interns cracked jokes about weekend plans. I listened. One intern said something about those guys upstairs rewriting the story. I finished my soup slowly, musing how rewriting stories is what people do to those they think silent. I rose, pushed myself from the table. Back home, I spread the original agreement and the logs before me. Yellowed paper next to digital timestamps. My name in typeface, in ink, in code. Documents they tried to bury. I labeled one folder, Legacy Truth. I placed another envelope in reach, addressed to myself. Do not open until needed. It was ritual. Preparedness. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I braced. Instead, it was a robotic voice. Your audit request has been accepted. Investigation begins Monday. I felt the shift, like stepping from water into light. A strategy born not of anger, but of unyielding purpose. I closed the laptop and sat in the window light, dusk turning to evening, the horizon faint orange, darkening. I looked at the badge, the agreement, then at myself in the mirror. No vanity, just recognition. Let the silence become my strategy. The morning sun spilled weakly through the tall windows of Boulder's financial district, painting long streaks across the pavement. I parked my car 2 blocks from Carver Care, choosing the side street I always preferred, quiet, less observed. My janitor uniform felt heavy, but it was armor. Not a shield for my body, but for their perceptions. Inside, the corridors hummed with the low buzz of cleaning machines and the occasional click of heels on polished floors. No one looked twice. My access card swiped at the side door with a soft beep. Anonymous, unnoticed, a shadow with a mop. Celine had texted me minutes earlier. Callum's sweating. I smirked. She had never called him by name outside this context. Her observation was clinical, precise. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and headed to the main hallway. Out of sight, I unclipped a small mic relay from my belt, tucking it under my uniform. By now, my preparation felt second nature. Every corner, every motion calculated. every sound captured. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, sleek glass reflecting fluorescent lights and the faint hints of my reflection. I could see them inside, moving through documents, shaking hands, laughing too easily. Isolde sat at the head, her posture rigid, shoulders squared but tense. The staffers murmured quietly, unaware of me. I crouched near a maintenance closet, camera positioned just enough to capture the room, audio lines feeding back to my phone. The ghost of Narina had a presence they could neither see nor ignore. The meeting started on schedule, agendas read aloud, voices calm but with undercurrents of strain. Then the anomaly surfaced. An alert pinged on Isolde's laptop, a folder appearing under the system's admin logs, Carver conflict. Her eyes flicked, a barely perceptible twitch betraying surprise. Callum leaned toward her, whispering, "Did she do this?" His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and dread. Isolde's lips pressed together. "She doesn't have the access. She's out," she said, too loudly to be casual. Celine's text buzzed again. "She's biting back." My lips curved into a thin smile. Through my headset, I heard Vera's voice muted mid-sentence. She was on Zoom from her home office in Denver, joining the board remotely. The audio samples played through the alert, recordings of Callum and HR discussing forged access, manipulated records, erasure of my credentials. Vera's hand had hovered over the mute button for too long before she pressed it, her mask of composure cracking just slightly. Tension rippled through her face. She wanted to be above it all, but the evidence was tangible, undeniable. I stayed quiet, listened, logged every word, every pause, every micro-reaction. The boardroom was a theater. I had the script, and they didn't even know I had a front-row seat. My narration whispered inside my mind. They built the lie with spreadsheets. I built the truth with silence. My fingers hovered over the mic, recording, archiving. The small victories lay not in confrontation, but in precision, the silent hammer striking without sound. After nearly an hour, the meeting began winding down. Papers shuffled. Emails were sent. No one suspected the room's shadows were being cataloged, every decision logged, every glance noted. I walked away, leaving the chaos untouched, unseen. The mops I carried were symbolic now, not functional. They were instruments of disguise. My heart thudded in a calm rhythm, controlled, strategic. I did not need to speak. Let their words, their panic, their shifting glances serve as proof. Returning to my apartment, the streets quiet in late afternoon light, I set my gear down. Celine had been right. Callum was sweating, though he wouldn't admit it to anyone. I powered up my laptop, reviewed the captured audio, cross-referenced it with the internal audit flags I had triggered the night before. Patterns emerged. Timestamps that didn't match schedules, files that had been altered after supposed approvals. Each inconsistency a brick in my wall of evidence. Each error a testament to their assumption that I had no eyes, no agency. A notification pinged on my phone. Unknown number. Text. "We know what you're doing. Stop, or we go public with Celine." I read it twice, the words heavy with threat, yet thin with understanding. They didn't see me. They assumed fear. They assumed compliance, but I had spent years navigating worse, and I knew the power of patience, of stealth. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Replying was unnecessary. Silence was my ally. I walked to the kitchen, brewed a cup of coffee, let the steam curl into the dim light of my living room. I looked at the janitor badge clipped near the entrance, my old identity card tucked beneath it, tools of the mundane, masks of submission. I smiled softly. They thought they had me cornered. They thought their boardroom strategies, their email chains, their erasures had removed my presence. But I had returned as a ghost, a calculated observer, and now an active participant in the unfolding narrative. Every word they had spoken, every gesture captured in digital eternity. Hours passed. I organized the day's findings into a secure folder, naming it Resurgence. The logs, the audio files, the cross-verified ownership documents, all ready to confront, to expose, to reclaim. In the silent glow of my laptop, I felt the line between retaliation and justice blur. I was ready to act, and my moves were deliberate, precise. They had underestimated the quiet, and that miscalculation would cost them. The evening stretched, soft shadows casting across the apartment. I reviewed Celine's messages, ensuring she remained unimplicated, her assistance invisible to prying eyes. Trust carefully measured. Evidence meticulously stored. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself a full breath, a sense of control, a taste of anticipation. The gloves were off. The war had begun, and I was no longer the pawn. I was the strategist. I set my phone aside, lit a candle on the desk, and let its small flame mirror my resolve. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one. The world moved unaware of the storm gathering in Carver Care's walls. I sat back, plotting, listening, preparing. Nothing would catch me off guard again. Morning sunlight filtered through the drawn blinds, painting thin gold lines across my living room floor. The envelope Celine had left was still on the small side table, trembling slightly in the early light, as if it held the weight of decades. I crouched beside it, hands steady despite my racing pulse. The quiet of the apartment contrasted sharply with the storm that had been building outside and inside me for weeks. I had spent countless nights piecing together the fragments of betrayal, each discovery a puzzle revealing their calculated cruelty. Today, that puzzle would finally assemble into something tangible. I opened the envelope slowly, aware of every second. Inside, a small flash drive and a folded note rested. Celine's handwriting, neat and almost fragile, bled sincerity across the page. "They forced me to draft your termination. They said if I didn't, they'd release my dad's medical data leak and pin it on me." My stomach knotted as I read, a mixture of anger, empathy, and a grim satisfaction twisting inside me. The flash drive held the confession, an audio recording where Callum and Isolde's voices, unmistakably theirs, coerced Celine to falsify my resignation. I played it immediately, letting the words wash over me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was evidence, a weapon, and a revelation of their moral decay. The day moved on, each hour tethered to the inevitable confrontation. I dressed in something understated but professional, a deliberate contrast to my previous janitor disguise. The streets of Boulder hummed with their usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Carver Care. I arrived at the building early, timing it to slip into the janitor break room unnoticed. From there, I could monitor the live-streamed board meeting that had been accidentally set to public for staff, a fortunate oversight, or perhaps fate's hand. Cleaning supplies tucked behind a locker provided cover, my presence invisible, a silent observer armed with truth. The board meeting commenced, and the room's energy shifted as Celine's recorded audio began to play. Staff froze, mid-sip of coffee, mid-tap on keyboards. Even the most indifferent employee paused. The voices of Callum and Isolde rang out, mechanical in their menace, but now transparent to all. Discussions of falsified resignations, manipulated contracts, and the attempts to erase me from existence. Murmurs swept through the staff quietly at first, growing in intensity, a ripple transforming into a wave of disbelief and tension. My heartbeat slowed, each breath measured. I watched them unravel, not with glee, but with the satisfaction of long-awaited justice. Isolde's composure broke visibly. Her voice rose, sharp, incredulous. She was just a symbol. She didn't run the business. The words hung in the air, awkward and desperate, exposing her fear to the room. Silas, their father, finally spoke, voice heavy with accusation and pain. "You used my daughter to sell integrity, then sold her out to survive." Vera's Zoom screen froze at a frown, her silence louder than words could have been. Their empire of deception was crumbling, brick by carefully calculated brick. I rose, unobserved at first, and walked calmly into the boardroom. Every eye turned as my figure entered, the room's silence folding over like a wave. I placed the original founding documents and the flash drive containing Celine's confession on the table with deliberate precision. No words were necessary. The evidence spoke for itself. The air trembled with the weight of unspoken admissions. My footsteps echoed lightly against polished floors, a metronome marking the rhythm of reckoning. I turned and walked out without a backward glance, the subtle sound of the door clicking shut behind me, sealing the moment. Minutes later, Callum's phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen. "You have been suspended pending formal investigation." His eyes widened as he stared at it, disbelief contorting his face. For years he had underestimated me, assuming silence was submission, that invisibility equaled defeat. But I had always known the value of patience and precision. Every move they had made, every attempt to erase me, had only built the foundation for this moment. I had become the architect of their downfall without a single confrontation, yet the impact was seismic. Walking back to my apartment, I felt a strange calm, the tension inside me coiling into a focused energy. I sipped coffee from my travel mug, reflecting on the arc of betrayal, cunning, and silent observation that had brought me here. Their arrogance, their confidence in their control, had blinded them to the quiet persistence that had always been my ally. Each calculated step I had taken now converged into the perfect storm of accountability. That evening, the city lights of Boulder shimmered against the cool twilight, indifferent to human schemes and dramas. I sat at my desk, reviewing the files I had amassed, securing backups, ensuring every piece of evidence was indelible and immutable. The flash drive, the original documents, the recorded boardroom audio, together they formed a mosaic of truth that could no longer be ignored. For once, the boardroom's walls, which had always felt like cages, now contained the seeds of their own exposure. I poured a final cup of tea, watching the steam curl lazily in the lamplight, and let myself breathe fully for the first time in weeks. The room was quiet, yet alive with possibility. I had reclaimed control, silently but unequivocally. The calculated calm that had defined my every move had reached its apex. Their power, meticulously constructed over years, had no purchase over me anymore. I smiled faintly, feeling the thrill of a battle won without a single raised voice, without surrendering my dignity. Outside, shadows lengthened across the streets, and the world moved unaware of the invisible war that had just been won inside Carver Care's walls. My mind raced, planning the next steps, anticipating their reactions, fortifying my own strategy. Every action, every whisper, every digital breadcrumb had been laid with precision. This was more than revenge. It was reclamation, a rewriting of my narrative on my terms. I felt for the first time in years unshakably grounded, resolute, and ready. The morning air was crisp as I approached the Carver Care headquarters, my briefcase swinging lightly at my side. Sunlight glinted off the glass facade, a sharp contrast to the tension simmering beneath my calm exterior. The previous night had been a blur of planning, reviewing files, and ensuring every piece of evidence was secure and ready. I had double-checked the original founding agreement, confirmed the integrity of the audio confession, and ensured that digital timestamps could withstand scrutiny. I was prepared, every detail accounted for. As I entered the building, the hallways seemed emptier than usual, the silence almost expectant, as if the building itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The shareholders' meeting room was quiet when I arrived. A few early staff members were setting up laptops, unaware that the most consequential presence in the room was me. I placed my briefcase down near the podium and opened it with deliberate slowness. Every movement was measured, intentional. My eyes scanned the polished wood surfaces, the nameplates that bore titles they had tried to rewrite, and the seats once reserved for me, now ominously empty. The absence of Isolde's presence felt surreal, almost cinematic, but I allowed myself no moment of distraction. I had come here for one purpose, to restore truth and integrity, not to dwell on their absence. When the shareholders began to assemble, murmurs spread like wildfire. Many recognized me immediately, some with surprise, others with lingering unease. I greeted them with a calm nod, keeping my expression neutral. The room settled as I stepped behind the podium, the flash drive and original founding documents within easy reach. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of months of manipulation, erasure, and calculated deceit settle into a focused resolve. This was not about anger. This was about finality. I began my address with a measured voice, emphasizing facts over emotion. I wasn't erased. I was sidelined because I refused to compromise integrity. Today, that ends. My gaze swept across the room, catching eyes that flickered with recognition, guilt, or confusion. I presented the documents, the original founding agreement, the fraudulent amendments, and the audio recording of Celine's coerced confession. Each piece laid bare the calculated duplicity that had attempted to erase me from the company I had helped build. Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of papers. Then came the mic drop moment. I inserted the flash drive into the room's main display system and projected a video showing Callum admitting privately to altering financial statements to redirect bonuses from my department to his own. The boardroom gasped collectively, the shock tangible, the moral collapse instantaneous. I let the footage play, observing their reactions. No one looked at me, no one dared speak. The evidence spoke louder than any accusations they had made or silences they had maintained. I added simply, "I didn't disappear, I was just patient." The words, calm but loaded with meaning, echoed through the room, leaving an impression far heavier than any raised voice could have. Immediately after, administrative actions took effect. Callum was suspended and removed from all positions. Isolde faced independent review, and her public relations firm suffered the loss of 2 major clients overnight. A press release circulated shortly thereafter, confirming my reinstatement as co-founder and strategic advisor. The procedural justice was swift, yet the emotional validation was even more profound. It was not about revenge, it was about correcting a narrative, about reclaiming the identity and role that had been unjustly stripped from me. Shareholders approached me individually, some with apologies, others with cautious admiration. I accepted none overtly, acknowledging them only with a nod. My mind was elsewhere, on the meticulous preparation, the long nights, and the quiet strategy that had culminated in this moment. Vindication, I realized, was not cathartic in the way one expects from movies or stories. It was colder, quieter, and infinitely more satisfying. It was the affirmation that patience and strategy could triumph over impulsive power and deceit. As the room began to empty, I lingered at the podium, my hand brushing against the engraved nameplate, Narina V. Whitaker, co-founder. It felt surreal, almost symbolic, that a simple plate of metal could signify so much. The air around me hummed with residual tension, a quiet reminder that though I had reclaimed my position, the scars of betrayal ran deep. I took a moment, inhaling the scent of polished wood and faint coffee, grounding myself in the present. Every step, every action, every decision had led to this juncture. The company had attempted to erase me, but the blueprints, literal and figurative, had never burned. I exited the boardroom slowly, the echo of my footsteps resonating through the hallways. Each corridor, each office, each empty seat told a story of misjudgment and oversight. I walked past the areas once dominated by those who had tried to rewrite history, feeling an unspoken triumph swell within me. The power of silence, patience, and strategic observation had proven itself against arrogance and deception. Later that evening, the city lights of Boulder reflected off the rain-slick streets as I returned home. The apartment door closed softly behind me, sealing the outside world away. On the doorstep lay a letter from my mother, left unopened, an artifact of strained relationships and unresolved history. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, contemplating the words I might read, the emotions they could trigger. But for now, I left it where it was. Some battles are fought in the daylight of public scrutiny, others in the quiet, private recesses of one's own heart. I sat at my desk, reviewing the events, confirming backups of all critical files, and letting the relief of the day settle into a reflective calm. I was reinstated, recognized, and vindicated, yet the echoes of betrayal remained, subtle reminders of the fragility of trust and the resilience required to protect it. The mop they had handed me at the start of this ordeal seemed almost ironic now, a symbol of humility turned into an emblem of triumph. The night drew on, and I allowed myself a single smile, not of gloating, but of quiet satisfaction. The work was not only about reclaiming status, It was about ensuring that integrity, patience, and intelligence could withstand calculated malice. Every carefully considered move, every silent observation, every piece of evidence had coalesced into an undeniable truth. They could attempt to erase me, but the blueprints, the core of my work, my legacy, my identity, had never burned. The morning sun had barely stretched across the Boulder skyline when I arrived home, carrying the residual weight of yesterday's victories and today's uncertain emotional reckoning. My steps echoed softly against the pavement as I approached the familiar threshold, the building's brick facade warmed by the early light, yet my mind remained icy with reflection. There, on the doorstep, lay a single envelope, Vera's handwriting unmistakable, elegant yet foreboding. I knelt briefly, picking it up and turning it over in my hands. The paper felt heavy, not from weight, but from years of unspoken words, missed connections, and veiled guilt. I did not open it immediately. I did not need to. I had learned that some truths reveal themselves more in restraint than in reading. Sliding the envelope carefully into my satchel, I walked through the apartment door, locking it behind me with a deliberate click that seemed to punctuate my resolve. I set the envelope aside and let my gaze drift over familiar furniture and personal items. The kitchen smelled faintly of the coffee I had brewed hours earlier, the soft hum of the refrigerator punctuating the quiet. In these small domestic rhythms, I found a sanctuary, a momentary pause from the storm of corporate and familial betrayal that had dominated my life for months. I sat at the dining table, clasping my hands together, and let my mind wander back through the years, through all the moments that had led to this point. I remembered the first time I had tried to establish my own little empire in the backyard of our family home. Cardboard boxes, paper ledgers, and a makeshift cash register, the makings of a kingdom I alone could envision. My father had chuckled at my attempts, dismissing them as childish play, while my mother's comment lingered. "She'll grow out of it." But I didn't. I had grown into it, into a woman who could see beyond simple games, into someone who could recognize strategy, subterfuge, and manipulation the moment it took shape. Yet, through all that growth, they had never truly seen me. And perhaps that had always been the most personal sting, invisibility within the very bonds meant to nurture. In the quiet of the apartment, I reflected on how carefully I had cultivated every measure of evidence, every subtle intervention, and every meticulously hidden safeguard. Celine's confession, the original founding documents, and the logs from the back-end system, they were more than proofs of corporate misdeeds. They were testimonies to patience, resilience, and the refusal to allow myself to be erased. Each step I had taken had been deliberate, measured, and tempered with understanding. I realized that power, true power, often resided not in the bluster of confrontation, but in the calculated precision of observation, patience, and the silent accumulation of truth. I moved toward my office corner, opening the drawers and carefully filing the flash drives, printouts, and backups in their designated folders. The envelope from my mother rested atop the pile, a silent reminder of unfinished emotional business. I didn't need to read it to know its content. Years of patterns had prepared me for this moment. I understood Vera, her affection intertwined with control, her love mixed with judgment. Perhaps her intentions had been a form of protection, or perhaps they had been simply the reflection of the world she understood, where survival often meant asserting dominance over those you claim to nurture. Either way, the envelope would remain unopened, a symbolic act of agency and choice that had been denied to me too often in the past. Later that afternoon, I made my way to a small co-working space downtown, where the first mentee of my new foundation awaited. She was a young woman, recently ousted from her family's business in Alabama, her eyes a mix of fear, confusion, and latent determination. I greeted her warmly, yet with a quiet gravity. "They underestimated you too, huh?" I said, smiling softly. "Good. Let's make sure they never get the chance again." In her eyes, I saw reflections of my own past, the moments of dismissal, the quiet erosion of confidence by those who should have nurtured it. And in her tentative nod, I found purpose reaffirmed. The foundation would not be about my revenge. It would be about reclamation, guidance, and empowerment. The day bled into evening. The apartment grew dim, lit only by the soft glow of desk lamps and the fading sunlight spilling across hardwood floors. I sat at my desk once more, reviewing plans, mentoring emails, and outreach strategies. The world outside my window continued in its oblivious hum, unaware of the small revolutions quietly taking root within. My gaze drifted to the janitor closet in my former office building, the small space where my name was etched into the back of a shelf. I hadn't erased it, nor would I. It was a testament layered with history, proof that some truths survive even attempts at obliteration. I pinned a sticky note alongside it. We remember in layers, this one stays. It was both a message to myself and to those who had tried to diminish me. The past, no matter how much it is rewritten, always leaves traces. The apartment settled into night. I poured myself a modest bowl of soup, sharing the moment with the few who had remained steadfast through the ordeal. Celine, my cleaning crew, and a handful of loyal friends. We didn't toast with champagne, nor did we make grand proclamations. Instead, we shared quiet laughter, warm food, and the unspoken acknowledgement of survival, resilience, and dignity. In those small, intimate moments, I recognized the true reward of the journey. Not validation from those who sought to erase me, but the profound satisfaction of integrity preserved and justice enacted without compromise. As the evening waned, I approached the unopened envelope one last time. I traced the edges with my fingertips, contemplating the words that could never erase what had been proven through action and endurance. Some letters, I realized, are meant not to be read, but to serve as markers of choice, reminders that closure comes not only from others, but from the acknowledgement of one's own strength. I left it where it lay, a silent testament to what remains unsaid, what remains unbroken, and what remains truly mine. They had wanted fewer mouths to feed. They had attempted to silence me, to erase me, to diminish my existence. But I had become the voice they could not suppress, the proof, the witness, and the architect of my own truth. And as I looked out across the city lights, I understood finally that some victories are quiet, enduring, and profoundly personal. The world may rewrite your story, but if you hold the blueprints of your life, no fire can consume what was never truly theirs to erase. Closing line. They wanted fewer mouths to feed. I became the voice they couldn't silence. As we close this chapter of Narina's journey, her story reminds us that resilience and patience can turn even the deepest betrayal into a path for justice. Have you ever faced a moment where standing your ground made all the difference? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping family stories and real-life lessons that challenge the heart and mind.